The United States Treasury Department has a special group of people whose job is to track down counterfeiters. Naturally, these people need to know a counterfeit bill when they see it. But how do they learn to identify fake bills? Oddly enough, they're not trained by spending hours examining counterfeit money, but rather they study the real thing. They become so familiar with authentic bills that they can spot a counterfeit by looking at it or feeling of it. John uses this same approach while warning us that in today's world there are counterfeit Christians, and he refers to them pointedly as children of the devil in 1 John 3 and verse 10. John explains that one of the things that distinguishes children of God from children of the devil is the way that we view sin. John reasons that the hope of receiving a glorified body at the resurrection motivates the child of God to be pure as the Lord is pure, 1 John 3 and verse 3. There were some in John's day, however, that felt moral purity had nothing to do with being a child of God or the hope of the resurrection. John argues, however, that whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin, for his seed remaineth in him, and he cannot, because he is born of God, 1 John chapter 3. These words may sound shocking at first, and you may think they contradict John's earlier words. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and think the truth is not in us. If we say that we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us, 1 John 1, verses 8 and 10. John says in chapter 1 that if we say we have not sinned, we are liars. In chapter 3, however, he says that if we are children of God, we do not sin. In fact, we cannot sin. Is John here contradicting himself? Well, absolutely not. The explanation lies in the tenses of the respective verbs that he uses. John uses the Greek tense in chapter 1 that says, if we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar. The tense here describes an isolated act that took place in the past. In chapter 3, however, John uses the present tense when he says, whosoever is born of God doth not commit sin. The present tense describes an activity that is occurring presently and is continuous in its duration. For example, a man may say, when I was a teenager, I stole a car. The verb stole is in this past tense and describes an isolated incident that occurred once in the past. It would be quite a different thing, however, to say, I steal cars. The verb steal is in the present tense and describes an activity that is occurring presently and is continuous. With the exception of our Lord, every great personality mentioned in the Bible sinned at one time or another. Abraham lied about his wife. Moses lost his temper and disobeyed God. Peter denied the Lord 3 times. However, sin was not the settled practice of these men. Their sin was totally contrary to their normal habits. Furthermore, when they sinned, they admitted it and they asked God to forgive them of what they had done. So it is with children of God today. Because of weakness, error, ignorance, or inadvertence, we may commit an occasional wrong act. But this will be the exception to the rule in our lives. When in such instances sin occurs, we approach the Father through our advocate Jesus Christ. We confess our sin and we ask for forgiveness, 1 John 1 and verse 9. In contrast, John says that those who live in habitual sin or continuous sin as a habit of life are the children of the devil. And he warns us not to be fooled by others or to kid ourselves. Living the life of a Christian is the only real proof of a person's being a Christian. Paul is in strict agreement with John's distinction between occasional lapses into sin and a life of continuous sin. He says that when we are baptized, we no longer continue in sin. We die to the practice of sin in baptism and we rise to walk in a newness of life, Romans 6 verses 1 through 6. Paul warns us further about the cavalier attitude that says Christians can deliberately engage in occasional isolated sins because I can always get forgiveness, Romans 6 and verse 15. Friends, we would all do well to ask ourselves on a regular basis, what is my attitude toward sin? Am I humble enough to admit sin and confess it? Is there some sin that I love more than Jesus Christ that I am deliberately allowing to remain in my life? Honest answers to such questions help us to determine if we truly are children of God or if we are merely counterfeits. Thank you for joining us today. Have a blessed day and a wonderful weekend.